Years ago, I watched my mother lose her job after developing carpal tunnel from years of repetitive data entry work. She had surgery, took time off to recover, and when she came back, she was let go. That moment really stayed with me. It showed me how much the hidden friction can live inside everyday business operations and how costly it can be when businesses rely on manual processes instead of automations that can build systems at scale. That experience eventually led me to build Connex, a platform designed to automate e-commerce accounting and eliminate operational friction behind the scenes. But as we work with growing brands, especially those in the $2 to $20 million range, we've noticed something else that founders often underestimate. Growth doesn't just bring operational complexity, it also makes your brand a target. As brands start selling on Amazon, Walmart, Shopify, and other marketplaces, they often discover unauthorized sellers listing their products, counterfeit goods appearing in search results, fake reviews damaging their reputation, or knockoffs completely competing directly against them. And suddenly the question becomes, how do you protect the brand that you work so hard to build? And that's why I'm excited to welcome today's guest. Jon Groza helps e-commerce brands defend their intellectual property and enforce their rights on marketplaces like Amazon and Walmart. His team works with companies to combat unauthorized resellers, counterfeits, fake reviews, and other threats that can damage both revenue and reputation. Today, we're talking about how e-commerce brands, especially in that $2 to $20 million growth stage, can protect their brand while scaling online. Jon, can you tell us a bit about your background and how you became focused on brand protection and enforcement for e-commerce companies?
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Joe. Exciting to be here and talking about what's become a very important issue for certainly many of our clients, really any business that's engaged in e-commerce, particularly in that $2 to $20 million range. So I'm a partner at KJK. We're a full-service business firm. And over the last 7 or 8 years, we developed what we call a brand enforcement practice, which is really an e-commerce practice. And within that practice group, we are supporting businesses that are engaged in e-commerce, helping them protect their intellectual property and their profit margins, and really overall their brands as they engage in online sales. And a big part of that is certainly combating these unauthorized sellers who can be so disruptive and damaging. We got into this based on client demand and need of existing clients that were leaning more heavily into e-commerce as revenue increased on platforms like Amazon, and that became more integral to their overall go-to-market strategy. Channel control and combating unauthorized sellers became essential to that process and ensuring that their brand was protected.
It's very important that brands are protected because, like you said, we met at an Amazon B2B conference not long ago that there's a lot of unauthorized resellers out there and they try to sell a similar looking product for less money and it drives down the cost of the product. When a growing brand first reaches out to you, what problem are they usually experiencing?
Well, particularly for growing brands, they focus primarily on really their brand development, their product development, R&D. Most of our clients are kind of sitting at the top of their respective markets, selling a very premium product where there's typically a pretty high profit margin that's worthy of protecting. And while they've invested in all these other aspects of their business, sometimes the investment it takes to do this the right way and in a meaningful way and combat these unauthorized sellers and protecting your IP along the way gets kind of put on the back burner. And they say, well, when we get a little bigger, we can hire an e-commerce team internally and maybe spend some money to enlist our outside counsel to assist with this. But if you're not doing it at the outset, it's hard to take back control of the brand and take back control of the buy box that you may have lost along the way. So we would always recommend I think there's a budget for every type of business in this sense. And the sooner you can attack this and get on top of it, the better. And often that starts with just getting your house in order, foundational documents, and getting your intellectual property, your trademarks and your copyrights registered.
So I'll give you an example. Let's say Vuori, for instance, they're a popular clothing brand company. Let's say a brand from China says, yeah, we sell Vuori shorts. They look the same. Maybe they have the same material, but it's not actually Vuori. You mean to tell me that's like an unauthorized reseller, people putting the Vuori brand onto something else?
Yeah, well, it depends. I mean, that's in that instance, that sounds more of like a kind of a counterfeit product situation, which is also very, damaging in its own right. And there's another strategy to be applied there as well. And certainly if they were putting on the Vuori mark, then that would constitute infringement on their trademark and potentially their copyright. So having those rights and having those your IP registered properly and maintained properly gives you some tools and weapons to use to combat someone who, may be undercutting your pricing and if you have a minimum advertised pricing policy, which we could talk about in a little bit, they're going to be selling, if they're selling below what you want to see your products advertised at. One way to combat that is to put them on notice that they're infringing on your copyrights and trademarks.
So you can go to Amazon and say there's a company out there that's selling like Vuori shirts. They're putting my logo on it and they're selling it for half price, but they're not. It's actually counterfeit goods, and Amazon will delist them. They have a team for that.
Yeah, so Amazon is getting better. I mean, this has been kind of an ever-evolving marketplace, right? And Amazon is a third-party platform that's providing an open marketplace for all. However, if you're violating federal copyright and trademark statutes, then that's a problem. Amazon will work with brands to take down those listings, not necessarily any unauthorized listing where the product's legitimate, but particularly in the area of counterfeit, that's an area where they'll pay particular attention. So it's important that you're working with somebody either directly at Amazon or somebody who, whether it's a consultant like a Brian Beckett and Seba who has relationships with Amazon, or a firm like KJK that has some knowledge about how to reach out to Amazon and notify them of those things so that they can be taken down.
And at what stage of growth do brands typically start seeing unauthorized sellers or counterfeit products appear in marketplaces? And Vuori is a huge company. They're everywhere. Are there smaller brands, maybe $2 million a year, $10 million a year?
Sure. I think anytime you're selling a premium product that has a really recognized brand name, it's not really I wouldn't say there's necessarily a revenue number that all of a sudden flips a switch and then you're going to start seeing that disruption. But I think the more your product's out there, certainly the more revenue you're deriving from third-party marketplaces. There are opportunistic sellers out there that will try to capitalize on things, whether they can figure out how to get your product through what's an authorized channel. If an authorized dealer is selling to them somehow, and then if they're able to get them through kind of some kind of sales or promotions, or through clearance or liquidation on a critical mass of your product in their inventory, they can really start to be disruptive. So, we have clients who have very recognizable names in certain product categories that find themselves very vulnerable to this if they're not vigilant and staying on top of it.
Exactly. I think as your business gets larger, you need to have some sort of vendor or partner company. Make sure no one's trying to counterfeit your products. Many founders assume that if they manufacture the product, they automatically control who sells it online. Why is this not always the case?
Yeah, so as I just talked about before, typically our clients are going to market in a variety of ways. They'll have, say our client, a typical instance our client would be the manufacturer. Our client may have their own proprietary website that they're selling their products on. They also typically will have an Amazon storefront. They have dealer relationships typically where, let's just use a category. For instance, let's say it's a high-end commercial lighting manufacturer. They're going to have a dealer network that they're selling to. So they want to see their products in their dealer showrooms throughout the country and on their dealers' websites and on within their dealers' catalogs. Probably they're being sent to homes or businesses. Where they don't want to see, typically our clients like to be the only entity that's selling third-party marketplaces like Amazon, and that helps to streamline their channel control strategy. Just because you're the manufacturer doesn't mean there's not ways within that dealer network that there's leakage and products could end up in the wrong hands. Like I said, that sometimes our clients' e-commerce teams and sales teams are not necessarily aligned. So sometimes there's a liquidation process where products are getting to the marketplace and they're ending up on third-party websites. And those websites don't even need to be categorically consistent. It might not even be exclusively a lighting selling entity. Oftentimes we see these resellers selling whole disparate categories of products, which just reemphasizes the importance here. If you really don't want your products being sold by anyone that you don't know, certainly, but certainly not someone with any expertise in your industry, or they're just selling a bunch of random stuff, it's probably not going to be a very good customer experience.
Yeah, I've gone to eBay and I was looking at Peter Millar shirts, and they have like clothes that's like last year's style, and sometimes probably like liquidations. You probably see like, hey, there's a Peter Millar shirt and it's it's 60% off. Why? It's like, oh, because it's an older shirt. So I see your point. And so are those like unauthorized resellers, or are those just like people selling older clothes?
Could potentially be. Sometimes you can get on and get the lay of the land with a a prospective client relatively easily and see what their presence looks like on Amazon, kind of see what types of seller storefronts are up near the top or maybe even stealing the buy box. And you can kind of get the sense just from some of the reviews and the other types of products that they're selling, whether or not it's unauthorized or not. So, but yeah, it could be an instance where you have authorized partners where you're liquidating or selling last year's product categories through an authorized channel. But, in instances where it's more, consumer electronics, automotive aftermarket, high-end lighting fixture manufacturers, things of that nature where there's really a broader profit margin to be protected and where there's a little bit of a gap where an unauthorized seller might be able to take advantage of, that's where you see it most frequently.
Yeah, like you said, with some of the closeouts. And how do these unauthorized resellers impact brands financially and operationally? Do the resellers end up having to lower their prices? I mean, you mentioned they lose the buy box.
Yeah, you can certainly lose revenue on these third-party platforms. It can get in and have a very significant impact on Amazon's algorithms and how they're rating and placing your products on you're losing revenue. You're also, in some instances, it's driving down the price of the sale. You're losing profit margin as well, which further adds to lost revenue. And then it's oftentimes creating customer dissatisfaction if the product is being purchased by a consumer who, unbeknownst to them, is buying it from an unauthorized channel. Unbeknownst to them, the warranty might not be in place. The shipping and handling may be different. Packaging might be different or have been disturbed or some way compromised. And certainly if it's a product that requires, as maybe, something that's, food and beverage category or something that would be a beauty product or something that's going to go on the skin or be consumed by the consumer. And there's all sorts of public safety concerns with that as well.
Yeah, I'll give you an example. I bought this HP laptop, and I think it was from a reseller, and it was in like a plastic bag, which is a $2,000 computer. Then I bought an Apple MacBook, the one I'm actually using for this podcast today, and it was in a beautiful box from Apple. I feel like it's very important for a business to have proper packaging and the experience. And when you go through some of these unauthorized resellers, it hurts the brand because they don't deliver the product or the support in the same way. So I agree with what you're saying.
Absolutely. And most consumers aren't going to really appreciate that distinction that, I bought it from, Joe's Plumbing Supply. I didn't buy it directly from the manufacturer, but it's still the manufacturer that's going to bear the cost of that, tarnishment of their brand in the minds and eyes of the consumer.
Exactly. Like I went to eBay and I bought a Peter Millar shirt and I brought it brand new with tags and it was in a bag. I don't care about the delivery, just deliver the product. It doesn't really matter. But for something like electronics or like a beauty supply company where packaging might be very important, I can see the problem. So counterfeits and knockoffs are an obvious threat. But when you also you said fake reviews and listing hijacking, how do those tactics damage brands on platforms like Amazon and Walmart?
Yeah, so that's something that some of our clients have experienced over the last several years. And sometimes it's from China, sometimes domestically, but oftentimes you see it in China or other areas of Southeast Asia where they're effectively able to manipulate the way Amazon is rating and displaying your products by basically bulk negative reviews for your products and fake positive reviews for their competing products. We have clients who, go up against these sellers from China oftentimes who are making not necessarily a counterfeit product, but what we would call a kind of a knockoff version, cheap, less reliable version of their products. And in order to compete unethically and we would say legally, they are sometimes deploying these tactics of fake reviews and driving up our clients' advertising costs in the process in many instances. And then you see your ratings going down on Amazon. So our firm at KJK have been really at the forefront of a lot of this, and we were able to get some very favorable results over the last couple of years for a client that was dealing with this type of situation, and got Amazon to recognize the importance of that and act and cooperate with us to take care of it.
And so you mentioned you were able to get Amazon to take care of some of these counterfeit products and get them pulled down. What role do trademarks, trade dress, and copyrights play in protecting brands? Do you tell Amazon, hey, I trademarked Vuori, no one else should be able to use it in the product name?
Well, Amazon, they may let somebody use that to identify what the product is. There's some nuance and technicalities in that regard. However, in many instances, we are seeing our clients facing unauthorized resellers who are infringing on their trademarks and copyrights. and their trade dress in some instances. So what we will do there is put them on notice. Client, if you are aware of someone infringing on your intellectual property rights, then you have an obligation to alert them of that. So we will send cease and desist letters oftentimes. And we're not going to send cease and desist letters saying, you can't advertise your product at it's below our price. What we will say is that you're violating our clients' rights in their intellectual property, their trademarks and copyrights without their permission. And, we expect these listings to be removed. It's making sure that those trademarks and copyrights are registered and maintained is really critical to any kind of effective brand enforcement strategy, because those are levers that you can pull that give you some weapons to use against these bad actors.
I have a somewhat unrelated question. I have a colleague of mine who sells soap and things on the internet, and she's found that Amazon keeps pulling down her listings. Is it because she's like an unauthorized reseller? I don't think she's using any copyrights, but why would they pull down, Amazon pull down beauty supply listings if you're not like violating a copyright?
Yeah, that's a good, I'm not sure. I'd have to know more detail, I think, as to what type of product she's selling. Is she just a distributor, or is she a manufacturer of these products?
I think she's a distributor. I've always curious because I've had other customers here at Connex too, like, yeah, we're on Walmart and we lost Walmart. I'm like, well, how did you lose Walmart? Did the store walk away? But I'm curious, like, why would a business's products all of a sudden get like delisted? Is it a copyright issue? Are they using improper search terms? Even when I went on Amazon, I searched for Vuori. I got some other brand instead. Vuori was nowhere to be found, and I purchased the first brand that I saw. So obviously, it's not a problem with the search terms, and I don't see the words on there. So I'm always very interested when companies are getting delisted, what they're doing.
Yeah, I mean, there's really a whole host of reasons why someone product's delisted. Perhaps the manufacturer, maybe she's not an authorized dealer with the manufacturers whose brand she's selling, and they've reached out to Amazon to do kind of a DMCA takedown or request it.
Yeah, maybe like you said, maybe she resells someone else's brand and she's not authorized. Yeah, I'll have to talk to her about that.
Yeah, happy to be a resource and see if there's a way we can assist there for sure.
So many brands delay trademark registration early on. What risks does this create when they start scaling?
Well, again, you're not going to have that at your disposal. You do have common law rights to your trademarks, but I think to be most effective in your protection strategy, you're going to want to make sure that those are registered as early as possible. So you might miss a window to effectively have those registered if you start using it in commerce and don't do anything about it. Yeah, it doesn't have to be a very complicated process. We have trademark attorneys here in-house at KJK that help clients with trademarks and copyright registrations every day.
And once a brand has their intellectual property properly registered, what tools become available to enforce those rights on marketplaces?
So it's something you can set. You can notify the platforms that your intellectual property is being infringed upon. It gives you a weapon there. It's a way to really kind of a hammer to use against these unauthorized sellers who you may see them on there with their unauthorized listings. You can enforce your IP rights. And if you do that properly, then what you can also do is get rid of unauthorized sellers who are piggybacking off your brand and potentially advertising your products for sale below what's called MAP, which stands for minimum advertised price. You have no control over what someone ultimately sells your product for, but you can get your network of authorized dealers to abide by your minimum advertised pricing policy as part of being on your authorized list. But you can't necessarily, once, there's something called the first sale doctrine, which gets a little legalese, but essentially what it boils down to is if I buy a pen from you, I now own this pen. I can advertise this pen for whatever price I want to advertise this pen now that I own it for resale. There are exceptions to that courts around the country, federal courts are recognizing, and we've kind of been at the forefront of some of these issues at KJK, and that is the material difference exception to the first sale doctrine. So yes, you can advertise that pen for whatever price you want. However, if the pen has material differences, such as the warranty doesn't apply unless it was purchased from an authorized dealer or from the manufacturer directly, that's a material difference in the eyes of the consumer, in the eyes of the courts. Customer service and packaging can also be considered certain instances as material differences, which would be exceptions to that first sale doctrine defense that some unauthorized resellers may try to deploy. So what the trademarks and copyright registrations do is gives you a basis to reach out and cease and desist letter and put those unauthorized sellers on notice that they're infringing on your IP rights as a first step in that process to get them to go away.
But people can buy like a box of pens and then say sell it for whatever price they want, even below the retail.
Sure.
So they get the buy box, which doesn't make sense, but that's what companies are doing.
Yeah, and a pen's probably not the best example because typically our clients' products are, like I said, kind of higher end, kind of at the top of their product categories where there's a higher price point, and then also kind of a larger margin that can be appealing to an unauthorized seller to try to take advantage of.
And final last question for today. If a $2 to $20 million e-commerce brand listening to today suspects that their listings are being abused or copied, what's the first practical step they should take?
So we would suggest talking with somebody like our firm, like KJK, and kind of seeing, we oftentimes just give free assessments of your brand and kind of get a lay of the land as to how you're positioned in the marketplace. See if it makes sense to implement a minimum advertised pricing policy. Does it make sense to put in place authorized dealer agreements? Are your trademarks and copyrights registered? So once you kind of get that house in order with those foundational documents, what do your terms and conditions look like? Do you have a warranty in place? Does the warranty explicitly say that it's not enforceable unless the product's purchased by the manufacturer directly or from an authorized seller? And then once you have all that in place, it's very easy. Well, it's much easier to go out into the market and enforce your rights and combat these unauthorized resellers effectively. So I think having kind of a consultation and kind of having somebody give you their assessment of where your brand currently sits is always a logical step. And certainly just making sure your IP is registered is a very easy thing to do initially.
Making sure that your IP is registered, finding these listings, then going to Amazon saying they're being duplicated, copyrighted, fake reviews, and then having these things pulled down.
And
That's
a lot
pretty
of folks
strategy.
think it's to some extent kind of, if you're not making the effort, then you're going to get steamrolled. Especially if you have a very desirable brand that you've invested heavily in. You may not get 100% effectiveness on takedowns, but you can certainly get into the mid to high 80s, 90s with an effective strategy. And if you're vigilant and you really focus on the issue.
So Jon, I want to thank you for helping us understand the hidden risks that e-commerce brands face as they scale online. One of the biggest takeaways from today's conversation is protecting your brand isn't always just a legal issue. It's a business strategy. And when authorized resellers, counterfeit products, or fake reviews appear, they don't just impact revenue, they impact trust. For founders building brands in the $2 to $20 million stage, the earlier that you put the protections in place, the easier it is to defend your reputation and maintain control as you grow. If you'd like to learn more about protecting your brand online, you can connect with Jon Groza on LinkedIn or learn more about his team's work in the e-commerce brand enforcement at kjk.com. And if you're in the scaling across multiple channels and struggling with manual reconciliation or unclear financial reporting, visit connexecommerce.com to learn how automation can simplify your operations, I should say. If you found this episode helpful, subscribe, leave a review, and share it with a founder who's building a brand worth protecting. Thanks, Jon.
Thanks, Joe. Have a great day.